And it actually caused me to think a little bit differently about the work that we do. So like, to be completely transparent, you know, with these projects, we really didn't set out with the intent of necessarily doing adaptive management planning. But with each of the projects that I'll talk about, we had the flexibility within the scope of work and clients who were open to doing things a little differently to actually adapt the planning process as we went so that we could really address the issues that we were learning about that were important within each community so that we were able to really end up with a planned product that can continue to be adapted as needed by the community as it's implemented. I think that kind of ability to adjust course mid-project can sometimes be looked upon somewhat negatively. I don't know if any of you have heard the phrase, "We're flying the plane while we're building it." But I think in our experience, and I hope to demonstrate in the descriptions of these three projects, that it has really allowed us to work with communities of different sizes and capabilities to produce a plan that they can and will actually use. And will also help them build capacity over time. So I'm going to share three project examples that demonstrate how we can create plans that are not only adaptive to different community capacities, but also resilient in the face of, you know, these crazy changing times that we're in right now. So first, we're going to go rural with an example from Taos, New Mexico. And then we're going to look at an urban example from Albuquerque's most dense and diverse urban neighborhood, the International District Urban Agriculture Plan, and then we'll conclude with a statewide project that is meant to be responsive to communities of all sizes and capacities. The statewide New Mexico statewide urban forest inventory and management plan. So this first project in Taos, Rio Fernando Park Master Plan. Here's a little site map. The Rio Fernando Park is it's a 20, Amy? Yeah.
Oh, you're not sharing your screen, just so you know.
Oh.
So I know you have a map to show us.
I do. Hang on a sec here.
She has beautiful slides to share.
Find it. Thank you so much for telling me.
And
total Zoom party fail. Okay. This was the beginning slide, the second slide, and this is the site map I was talking about. So yeah, the park it's a 20-acre site about a mile south of the plaza downtown Taos. Taos is a community of roughly 6,000 people in rural northern New Mexico. It was purchased in 2015 by the Taos Land Trust. Serves as their office and headquarters. There's 7 acres of wetlands and riparian areas on the property, including the Rio Fernando, 13 acres of agricultural land. The property was left without management for 25 plus years. And so it was really sort of facing misuse and critical ecological degradation. The Land Trust goals for the project really spoke to its opportunity. The physical presence of intersecting riparian habitat and traditional agricultural lands creates this really unique regional resource for reconnecting to the land. And the planning and programming process presented this opportunity to really show the ability of a diverse community to collaboratively create a public space that supports you know, these healthy interactions between natural and cultural ecosystems, ultimately improving the community's ability to adapt to change. The planning context is important for understanding why we developed this kind of different process. And I don't know if like, how many of you guys have been to this community meeting? And I don't know if this accurately represents the communities that you live in. This is from one of the Taos Parks and Rec master plan meetings. But it's a really common issue here for us in New Mexico, and it really is not anywhere near representative of the Taos community, which is more than 50% identifies as Hispanic or Latino, you know, and has a median household income of like 31,000. So it's a concern when we have folks that are driving decision making about projects that are not necessarily representative of the community. Taos's diversity does kind of challenge community cohesiveness. They're a very active, engaged, opinionated community. They have more nonprofits per capita than any other place in the whole country. And they were dealing with a lot of planning fatigue. This situation in which the community members feel like nothing is ever really done with their input. They just go to meetings and wave their arms around. So also important to note that the planning process coincided with a National Recreation and Parks Association grant-funded wetlands and river restoration project to address water quality and quantity issues. And so physical changes were being made to the site as we were, doing the site planning process. So, we needed to do this differently. The Land Trust demanded an extremely high level of community involvement. We had several dozen stakeholder groups involved, including the local arts community, local government, nonprofits, funders, and local students on the project steering committee. And then our design team members included several local experts in planning and design, ecological restoration, and permaculture. We really tried to replace the typical public meetings where you saw the kind of participation we showed with that previous slide, with more educational, participatory, playful activities, all with the goal of building project partners, encouraging social interaction and participants' ability to contribute directly and really see the impacts of their contribution. And of course, I don't know, I hope this isn't like giving anybody isn't freaking anybody out, because obviously this is all pre-COVID. So with all of these projects, we were able to have these really great gatherings and community events, and I'm hopeful and looking forward to when we can do this again this way. But that was the situation there. So the planning process really became like a community building process. And we learned that, when we're working with people on projects, people want to work. So I tried to identify and support implementation of kind of the more like low-hanging fruit aspects of the project implementation. So work that could be done to show physical change, without having the cart go before the horse. This included a lot of citizen science. So we had community members help with site inventory and analysis. High school students did the vegetation survey. We had folks doing bird and, animal counts and water quality testing. So a lot of the data that we got about the existing conditions of the site came from community members collecting that information. And then the hands-on activities, when we make stuff, it causes us to use a different part of our brains and allows us to see the combined results of our collaborative efforts. So it creates this sense of togetherness that is important for making people feel comfortable enough to contribute, and as well as being open to hearing other people's perspectives. So we tried to have fun, play whenever possible, make sure we included families and youth and elders, and really, sort of looked at these opportunities to work with folks in the design process as gathering as opposed to meeting. We tested the actual uses that were proposed for the park, including events and performances. Here we see an activity at one of the planning events where community members created an art installation with invasive Siberian elm saplings that youth crews had recently removed from the site as part of the restoration work. We created a series of graphics and diagrams that shared back what we heard from the community and showed how this directly informed the plan recommendations. This, and it's looks like it's a little pixelated, but we see an overlap of the different proposed uses and their ability to support the overarching themes for the project. So, from this evaluation, we were able to look at the overlap and create this top 10 program elements for the project. this is the final site master plan graphic, which and the site master plan was really organized around permaculture zones of use, so higher levels of access to and management for areas of higher use with lesser access and management in areas that require more protection and conservation. So I'll note here that in terms of adaptability, this plan has since completely changed. Because what happened was that the blue line that you see here is the Vihele Romo acequia, and acequias are ancient forms of irrigation. Basically, they're ditches of water that are very carefully leveled so that folks can irrigate their crops from them. And they were able to restore this acequia, which was something that when we put the plan together, we didn't want to make that assumption. And so what happened is they gained all of this sort of arable land and decided, okay, we're going to grow stuff out here and then build off the existing building for this facility instead of doing it in a separate place. But because the principles that were outlined in the plan, I think were clear in terms of the overall goals of the project, they were able to make this change while still upholding the integrity of those goals and adapting to actual need. The implementation of the project, since has been kind of mind-blowing, and it really like a year since the plan was completed, the river flow increased significantly and the beavers came back. We had to really quickly put the wire, baskets around the trees that they wanted to save. We let them eat the Russian olives and the Siberian elms, but there were some nice apple trees we wanted to keep. The acequia was restored. There was lateral grading done to allow the site to be planted with rye and other grain. And that rye actually, look at that, it's crazy. I don't even remember those pictures at the beginning of the presentation, like what the site looked like. So they're providing local bakeries with grain to produce this bread. And we've got this great demonstration garden, working with youth crews and the high school. And I think they've built a greenhouse as well already. So I think, our takeaways from the project was that sort of knowing that the Land Trust's major goal was to connect people to each other and the land. That was like this major goal for the project. We had to build that into the planning process. And so the process built the relationships and partnerships that really support the ongoing and future programming for the site, which is what's making this kind of rapid implementation possible. So the next project I want to talk about is in Albuquerque, the International District Urban Agriculture Plan, which we completed very early 2020. The International District is also known as the ID, and I'm going to refer to it that way just because it's less words. But it's one of Albuquerque's most economically and culturally diverse urban neighborhoods. About 40% of the neighborhood residents are below federal poverty level. The area has one of the highest population densities in the state. They experience very high levels of youth in poverty, poor food access, and the lowest level of tree canopy and highest heat island index in the city. So perhaps in relation to these, socioeconomic and environmental factors, this is another community who's been kind of planned to death and frustrated by lack of action related to, demonstrated need. So a major challenge for the project was really getting at, what makes urban agriculture successful in the long term. And I think we're all probably familiar with this, with the work that you all do. We needed to understand what the major barriers were to starting and really maintaining these efforts, because I think, community gardens are always like this yay warm fuzzy thing, or orchards, but it's like it's a lot of work to take care of those things, and you got to figure out like who's gonna do the weeding, who's gonna do the pruning, You know, and most municipalities don't have the capacity to do that kind of work or really, you know, do it well. So how to get around this kind of, you know, one teacher wonder phenomenon, where there's this one enthusiastic person that starts the garden or starts the agriculture effort and then burns out or changes schools, or the irrigation system breaks, or the grant cycle ends, and then, you know, you just have this messy, weedy sort of sad situation. So our methodology included community-assisted inventory and asset mapping, hands-on community engagement, and the actual design and implementation in part of 9 different what we called priority urban agriculture sites, which you see in the red stars on the map here. While some of the sites weren't strictly located within the international district boundary, they do serve a population tied to communities who identify with the ID, and so we felt it was important for boundaries to be a little bit fluid. We began by developing a fairly inclusive definition of urban agriculture, and really to understand the potential for layering uses, you know, because I think that's one of those things that we saw, that like successful urban agriculture efforts like didn't just do one thing. They served a number of communities or had multiple organizations involved with, you know, multiple sort of layers of outcome, and that allows for that sustainability over time. So using this resource network framework, we identified key stakeholder groups, built a steering committee of, you know, trusted ambassadors to a broad range of community organizations and institutions, all of which are, you know, active in the ID. Our team engaged a planning and action process that included participatory design, evaluation, and improvements to existing gardens, assistance in acquiring project funding, and in some cases, actual implementation of these garden plans. So the immersive approach really allowed us to experience and understand the barriers and opportunities for community-based urban agriculture in order to develop realistic and actionable recommendations. And our client in this was actually Bernalillo County, but we worked with Albuquerque Public Schools. And all of the, I think only one of the 9 sites was actually on county property. So the other projects were schools, they were nonprofits, some of them were city properties. And so it was a really sort of different situation, you know, for one entity, one jurisdiction to be putting money towards the development of this kind of thing on other people's property, basically. But I think they saw the value in creating these partnerships. So, you know, we really wanted to make sure that we were going to give Bernalillo County realistic recommendations for how they could support long-term community-based agriculture. So we sought feedback from the community, you know, in addition to sort of trying out all these different projects. We asked, we had a couple community events to understand why, you know, urban ag projects succeed or fail. You know, as much as possible, we tried to coincide with other community events, you know, something I've just missed so much this last year. It's been such a challenge. This is a tree giveaway at a middle school during an Earth Day celebration that we kind of piggybacked on to you know, work with the community that was doing this. Here, this was a garden crawl. This is really cool. We went to multiple school garden sites, learned with community members how to make a worm composter out of a couple of buckets. And then these are some of the student designs. So we worked with each of the groups involved with the 9 priority sites in a participatory design process. You know, so we asked the students, like, okay, you know, if you could have a farm at your school, like what would you have there? And they had great designs. They had great ideas. It was so cool to get to work with them. And I think it was cool for them too, to get to see like, hey, I made these suggestions and then these things showed up, you know, in the plan. and yeah, we worked with several underrepresented groups, which included youth, individuals of color, including Native Americans, and also people experiencing homelessness. So we were looking at urban ag installations in all of these places that were serving these different communities. Several different scales and versions of urban agriculture were represented in the different sites. So from your more traditional community garden with like rented plots to a community center, city community center garden, which featured heirloom variety plants, to, what would be Albuquerque's first public school farm. This site is a healthcare facility's food pharmacy, which is a program where people can basically get prescriptions for free, healthy, fresh food as a preventative measure. So you can see, I don't know how clear it is, but this was a old bank drive-through. So the cars would come around and do their bank business there. When we started working with the programs managers, they shared this garden plan with us, and it was like a bunch of raised beds on top of the existing asphalt. And we talked about them like really, like, is that really what you want to do? Because they had this big vision for it. And we talked about, there's this opportunity to pull out the asphalt and demonstrate both water harvesting and soil remediation, something that's really needed in a lot of these urban lots. How do you remove asphalt and then, remediate the soil so you can grow edible things in it? And it was so cool because they decided to switch gears. I mean, they were like mid-construction of this building facility, and they said, okay, whoa, stop. All right, we're gonna do this garden completely differently, and go with the new design, which you see here. So water from the parking lot came down, was directed to the pollinator garden over here. Water collected on the garden site was collected for the stuff grown here. And we did still provide some raised beds for ADA accessibility with classroom space underneath the existing overhang. So let's see. I've talked about this before, but the planning process really sort of, and the steering committee meetings, like it was like all these great connections were being made between these different groups and people. And, I'm just, the sort of Groundwork Studio is just sort of like, this crazy synergy is happening. Like, this is amazing. These partnerships created between the different stakeholder groups, like these are food justice interns. They did a bunch of work at a number of the project sites, including the healthcare facility. This is the community garden, and so sort of this idea that these youth programs can really support the maintenance of a number of urban agriculture efforts, and everybody wins in that situation. This is the demonstration of irrigating the soil sponges at the the food pharmacy's ribbon cutting. Just real quick, it was the demonstration of these soil sponges. I don't know if this is a concept that the group is familiar with, but basically it's putting organic matter in the soil and then you water it and then the microbes like party and you end up decompacting the soil and, enriching it and remediating it. And it's like this sort of super low tech, low cost way to do this. And when we did the demonstration of it, it was just really neat because so many folks were like, oh, hey, like I could do that. Like we could do that in our, vacant lot or my backyard. Like this is easy and inexpensive. So there's the picture. This is the summer of 2019. And then this is last summer. So they planted sunflowers. We had a temporary irrigation system for the sponges. And you can already see the different sort of quality and color of the soil, which is pretty cool in a year's time, despite some holdups due to COVID. So the plan was completed in January 2020, but the work has really continued, which is really inspiring, sort of despite a lot of the hiccups with COVID. A major recommendation in the plan was for the county to actually create a contract position for a person to continue the facilitation of the steering committee, or project partner meetings as they're now called. And so the website that we created, and if you guys are curious about the project, please go check it out. bccurbanaG.com is supported with ongoing county funding, and is serving as a networking tool and community resource for ongoing urban ag. Project partners continue to work together on overlapping projects, assisting each other with garden improvements and maintenance and joint grant applications, which was neat to see too, because it kind of created this environment of collaboration, like, hey, let's all go after this grant funding together, which is in a situation that's they're usually competing with each other for this money, right? But then, so this makes it a partnership, and I think makes their applications that much stronger. And I think this last year during COVID really accentuated the inequities around food security. And I think the work that the project partners did made it so many urban ag efforts that could have easily failed during the pandemic have actually provided better food access to the people in these communities who really need it. So pretty inspiring stuff. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about let's see. I'm sorry. The statewide urban forest inventory and management plan. And this is the project. I don't know if folks saw the presentation at the partners conference, but this is basically the presentation I gave there. So what would our landscapes look like without trees? Here we see a couple of really iconic historic landscapes in New Mexico. At top is the Roswell Courthouse. Below is the Fuller Lodge in Los Alamos. And kind of this question about like what really is the connection that we have between culture and history and trees, and why do we value them? And this was the question that State Forestry really set out to answer with this project, which was funded by a Forest Service landscape scale grant. This is Hurley, New Mexico, which is a really good candidate for the middle of nowhere. But it's like a lot of New Mexican towns where you can stand on a street and look down the road at a double row of Siberian elms that are probably around 100 years old because they came with the railroad, and it's like why how did this happen? And this was the previous urban and community program, urban and community forest program manager Jennifer Dan. That this is what she was doing. She was standing on the street and asking like, how did this happen? Like, why are we in this situation where we've got all of these aging trees and communities with very little capacity to actually take care of them? And that's why she applied for the Forest Service grant, which was based on this premise of, we need to understand the history of trees in New Mexico in order to understand, why we got here, and then what we're going to do about it. So we began with an investigation of the history of trees, starting with Spanish orchards, and obviously we recognize that there were trees pre Spanish colonization, but decided to start the project at that stage. To territorial settlement, expansion of the railroads, which is really what brought a lot of these trees to New Mexico, statehood and present day. The first stage of the project was to conduct inventories, which had never really been done on a statewide level before. And so we worked with Planet Geo. We used the tree plotter application to conduct inventories in the 33 county seats, which sort of represented a sort of geographic, environmental, socioeconomic distribution across the state. And we looked at about 200 trees in each community. And the trees that we inventoried were urban trees. So trees that had been intentionally planted, often in historic districts, but we also worked with communities to ask them, you know, like, we want to do this inventory with you. Like, where do you want information about your trees? And so we were able to produce inventory reports for all of the communities for them to use in their management planning, but also a statewide report that, you know, spoke to the condition of trees in the state, which was not great. New Mexican communities are, by and large, really resource strapped. You know, I always like joke about like I'm like this masochist landscape architect that decided to do landscape architecture in a state where there's like no money and no water. But you know, so thinking about, you know, how we help these communities do management planning, it's really hard to kind of look at some of the national standards and say like we can apply these expectations to these folks. I mean, it's like, out of all of the communities in the state, like only 2 municipalities have arborist positions, paid arborist positions, and a lot of the communities have like 1 person for their parks staff. So, you know, sort of industry standard management best practices is pretty daunting for a lot of these folks. And actually, it was at this point in this project, after doing the inventories and kind of understanding these challenges, that we decided to completely change the scope. And what we initially were going to do was management plans for different historic landscapes. So management plan for a plaza or a streetscape or a park or a courthouse ground. And we realized after doing these, you know, this inventory work that would just, like, they'd be really nice coffee table books probably, but they would be completely useless for, you know, 90% of New Mexican communities. So it was like, all right, how can we make this useful? And so what we did was we worked with specific challenges that we saw pretty much all of the communities facing. Basically how to replant and deal with reforestation of historic landscapes, how to prioritize work, just sort of like the volume and scale, especially because of a lot of the sort of New Deal plantings. The government planted a ton of trees in New Mexico, and then none of the communities have the capacity to take care of them. So helping them understand how to prioritize work. Trees in the public rights of way are a big problem because, you know, we have situations where the trees are in the public right of way, but the resident or the private entity who, you know, owns the property adjacent is responsible for caring for them, and they don't have the knowledge or the capacity to do so. And then also, I think really less of a problem and more of a opportunity was agency coordination. So, you know, we were inventorying trees again across jurisdictions, between states, you know, federal, municipalities, counties, and schools, you know, and we just didn't see folks kind of talking to each other and leveraging resources so that they could have a more kind of cohesive management of the community forest. And then we also had, you know, sort of general strategies and recommendations to help different communities, but these were really organized more in a sense to meet communities where they were at, depending on, you know, the level of staffing and training, you know, your community is able to enact, and where they're starting. So. And that was sort of how we organized the plan. Because again, we just kept coming back to like, who's gonna read this? You know, like we really didn't want it to end up, you know, on state forestry's shelf, not getting used. And so we set it up to sort of like a choose your own adventure format, right? So I'm gonna choose my situation over here, and then the PDF document is linked. So you can click on that and it'll take you to where we're going. So we have a small staff who doesn't have the time or the skills to manage trees. You click on that and it takes you to consider this, and here are some resources. So you don't have to, you know, you don't have to read that much, which is great because nobody reads this much. And yes, this is available. That's actually almost there. It's online. One other thing we did was look at case studies so communities didn't feel quite so alone, because that was something we heard a lot, was like, oh, we're the only ones who can't deal with this. And we were like, no, you're not. You're all dealing with a lot of the same challenges, and here's some examples of how other communities have dealt with it. We also did, believe it or not, decision trees, again, to help people access the resources related to their specific issue or concern without having to read much. And then here we're getting to, this is the project story map with the link up here at the top. And I can provide these to the group if there's interest in that with a follow-up email. We have a website for both the historic narrative and then also for the management plan. And that was the thought, was we need to make this something that's available online so that the general public has access to it. Have we seen a positive impact? Yes, we have. Several communities where we did inventories. Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Vegas have since purchased the tree inventory software and are using it to inventory and manage their urban forest. So that was really exciting to see that kind of immediate pickup from that. And there's been some other projects that have come out of it too. I think one of the great benefits of the project was, I think it let a lot of communities know that state forestry is there for them, and that there's a lot of resources that they have access to that are free, basically. And so, and also grants. And so a lot of communities started taking control of or taking advantage of that more. So I want to close, I think, with kind of coming back to this idea of flexibility in the planning process, and really helping, the communities that we work with build their capacity, for adapting to change. Because I think, often we go into a project, like here we're looking at like our tree management with our management priorities, and, we really, planting is just more fun than the rest of it, right? So that's where we put a lot of our priorities, and it's like, oh, we got to set these canopy goals. But so we start the project here, but then we get into it and we're like, oh, actually, like planting is like this tiny little piece, and there's all this other stuff we need to address. So we need to adjust our course in the planning process so that the plan actually helps folks, work with the reality that's out there. So with that, I'd love to hear questions, comments, thoughts, and again, just really appreciate you all taking the time and allowing me to share this work.
Amy, I have the first question, and I'm sure everyone else has the exact same question, but how many of you are there to do all this work? This is just unbelievable.
Thank you. Well, actually, so we have a new person starting Monday, and we'll be six people. So we'll be the biggest that we've ever been. I started Growing Studio in 2015 with just with me, and then we've grown. So, but I think a big part of why we were able to do all of this is because we put people to work, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't want to come in and do it for them. I can come back to stuff if we want to, but I want to see everyone's faces. So yeah, it's all sort of leveraging those resources and plugging people in, and then when you're done with the project, they're doing it, and that's how you want it anyway.
Beautiful. So let's open up. We have about 10 minutes left to reflect and ask questions and talk amongst ourselves. So the floor is open.
Really appreciate the nice words about the graphics and stuff. Thanks, guys.
Quick comment. Aaron Mayer just became New Mexico State Forestry Division Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator. I guess the question is, have you had the chance to meet her? And if
Yes.
not,
Yes,
okay.
I have. Yeah, definitely. And I think we had, I think it may have been the first or second Urban Forest Council meeting with her just a week or so ago. Yeah, we miss Jen, but we're really glad to have Erin. And I can't believe how brave she was. She like up and moved to New Mexico, like right in the middle of COVID, and has been working, remotely this whole time. It's amazing.
Thank you, Amy. This is Frank from West Virginia. That you had 1,500 people out of a community of 5,500. That's a spectacular turnout. So congratulations on that. And on the design work, we are kind of trying to pull some. We don't have any designers or artists on staff, so that's an area that we really struggle with. We're looking at City Lab to pull some of their kind of iconographic stuff down. Do you have a go-to, a public source area that I might be able to find some cool graphics?
Well, I don't know about sort of public or free sourced. Shutterstock has a lot of like vector files that you can start with. So you can kind of search like, this is the diagram that I'm looking for, and then you can, I think it's, it's not a super expensive subscription. I think for like $50 you can get 5 images. And then it's like an Illustrator file that you can then modify. But as far as free stuff, other than kind of Googling images online, I wish I had a better answer for you.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks Amy so much for your presentation. I'm curious if any jobs were created as sort of in sustaining or coordinators on these community greening sites.
So I think that the main position that was created was the county funded position. But there were, it was interesting actually, because there was a lot of movement between the people who were involved in the different groups and their positions within different organizations. Like for example, the garden coordinator with APS schools during the process of the project changed jobs and went to Presbyterian Healthcare to work at the food pharmacy. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know that there were any other positions created as part of different organizations that didn't exist already. But that's a good question.
Thank you.
And I want to say also, this is Frank again in West Virginia, that your very first slide of, have you ever seen this, where all the attendants are white people of middle to upper income? Yeah, well, I've been thinking we are very homogeneous in West Virginia. And I've been thinking along as we look into improving our equity and diversity, we're looking at survey questions, and we know that we can't ask that. We won't get any meaningful response out of what's your race. So we're looking at other kinds of questions like what cultures might you be interested in, right? So as a way of because we know where we're coming from, we know what the people look like. What we don't know is what kind of background or interests or language skills they might have. So that's the kind of questions. So we end up with the dots are a little more spread out than all in the white box.
That's a really interesting way to frame that question. Thanks, Frank. I'm interested to know about that and think about that. I think when, we usually ask, folks like, how do you identify, but also, do you live in a multi-generational household, or what language do you speak at home? But that one sort of gets it. So, and I'm a total like survey question nerd. So like, I'm really interested in that. And the fact that, it sounds like the results of it is that you are getting sort of a better understanding of the diversity of people who are involved. Is that right?
That's our goal. We're just getting started on it now. We're just trying to integrate it.
Interested to see how that goes. Because I think that even, I'll admit, like, even with the sort of extra crazy level of community engagement that we've put into a lot of these projects, we never get anywhere near the sort of accurate representation of ethnic and socioeconomic distribution. Like it's we haven't done it yet. I'd like to get there, but
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge I think all of us face. I'm looking at the audience right here at this meeting too, right? Is how do we bring in more representation? Wondering, one idea that Elizabeth here knows, is that we've been playing with is trying to actually provide people with money for their time, right? So paying them to come to events, or providing childcare and things like that to make it more accessible. Have you done any of that type of?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you can do the, sort of paid intern thing, I think that the challenge we often find with that is just like public procurement. Like, if you're working for the state or municipality, like their procurement system like starts to freak out when you do a raffle with prizes and things.
Right.
And so we've got to like build in the reimbursables up front. But I think definitely, I don't know that the food justice interns that we worked with for the ag plan were paid, but that was part of a different program. It wasn't something that the county supported. So
Right.
their participation was supported, but not by, like our project funds. No, I think, it's something that we're looking at doing with a couple of current projects that we're working on, particularly in terms of providing an incentive to responding to surveys or participating in focus groups, whether it's a gift card to buy a grocery store. We're doing a youth survey in Santa Fe, and we're going to offer a incentive for the teacher who gets the most responses. I don't know if folks are familiar with Meow Wolf, but we're going to give them tickets to that, and maybe some like gift certificates for restaurants or something. But yeah.
Well, Amy, we are at the end of our time. I'm just going to put a plug in that you look up the Food Project in Boston. That might give you some interesting ideas.
Okay.
Yeah, they work with youth around urban farming. And
Great.
they do, I don't know what their revenue stream is, but that might be an interesting place for you. So our next talk is March 7th. Sorry, that is our talk today. April 21st is our next talk. We'll be hearing from Ashley, I'd never get her name right, McCallany. She used to be a graduate student over at UMass Amherst, and she wrote this wonderful handbook on tree selection for climate change in Massachusetts. I think it'll be relevant to a lot of our work throughout the Northeast, especially as we think about a changing climate and how we select trees that will survive and thrive in that changing climate. So I look forward to seeing you then. We're still looking for a speaker for the May session, May 19th. So spread the word if you know of anyone who might be interested and have a topic that would be fresh and exciting. And with that, see you all. Have a great spring equinox in a couple of days. And once again,
Thanks for
happy St.
organizing
Patrick's
us.
Day.